Adobe is one of the oldest building materials around. It is an unfired brick made out of pure mud. With proper care, structures made out of adobe can last for hundreds of years. It looks great, it contains low embodied energy, it aids in stabilizing the temperature of building, and it's easy for the novice builder to use. Of all the materials that I used in this house, I think adobe was probably my favorite. It's easy to work with, it's a very simple type of material. You use mud as a mortar, which is easy on your hands, and it just works out really well and gives you a very beautiful, very energy efficient structure. Now the first course is fully stabilized, which is required by code, and that means that the fully stabilized adobe will not dissolve in water if any were to leak into the structure. Since it is fully stabilized, we've set it in a cement mortar for the same reasons. It will not dissolve in water. Every course of adobe and layer of mud mortar after that is semi-stabilized adobe with unstabilized mud mortar. And that goes up all the way to the top course, and that's capped by the bond beam. The bond beam is a solid concrete beam that sits on top of the adobe wall and structurally holds it all together. The bond beam also makes for a secure way to fasten the roof to the walls. Adobe bricks are approximately 4 by 10 by 14 inches in size. The main thermal mass wall will be an interior wall that is 2 feet thick, comprised of 2 rows of overlapping bricks. We have the first row running the long ways, goes with the length of the wall. And we have the other adobes running the other way. This makes up the 2-foot width that we need for the mass storage wall. Now the next course of adobes will just overlap this. We'll have this course running up on top of the seam here. And this gives us a 4-inch overlap, which is required by code. And as you can see, the gap between each adobe is about 1 finger in width. And we'll fill this first course with cement mortar. Every course from now on will be put on with mud mortar instead of cement mortar. The mortar used for the adobe wall is made out of mud itself, just like the adobe block. It was purchased as a dry mix, in other words, just the raw earth material that the adobes were made out of at the adobe yard. It was delivered by a dump truck, and then all you do is you add water to it. And as you can see, you keep it a very thick mix. This is so that as you stack the adobes up, the mud does not ooze out the side. Once it's mixed, you then put it on the adobe block itself using either trowel, your bare hands, whatever. You just get it on to the approximate thickness and then gently place the adobe brick up on top, and you wiggle it into position. Notice the strings that we're aligning the adobe blocks up to. This is called a speed lead, and this is a method of keeping our walls true without having to worry about them starting to lean inwards or outwards as we're building them. It's just one of these extra techniques that with a little bit of extra time and foresight will save us a lot of time during the construction process. This is called a story pole. And on this pole we have numbers, each representing the height of 1 layer of adobe. This is how it works. After each layer of adobe is laid, the speed lead, which is sometimes called a mason's line, is raised 1 increment. The line is tightly stretched between the 2 story poles, so it is perfectly horizontal, assuming that we keep the story poles true during the construction process. The adobes are positioned so they barely touch the string. The walls will then be straight and true with a minimum of work. This is one way to cut an adobe, and what you would do is with your adobe in places to where you want it, mark it with your trowel with just a scratch or something to show your cut line. And then what we can do is just either using the side of a trowel or a hatchet in this case, we just go in and put a score line right where we want our break. It only needs to go down, a 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch or so. We just get a little bit of a ridge there. Then we take the adobe and we have it resting on a cement block, and we just kind of drop it lightly right on the corner. And we get a nice clean break. steel ladder is placed on top of the adobe every 4 courses. This wire reinforcement gives the adobe additional strength, particularly in seismic areas. Mud mortar is then placed on top of the steel ladder. The electrical wiring for adobe walls is run right in between the courses of adobe and mud mortar. And as you can see here, the wire's just been laid out on this top course of adobe. And this actually gets sandwiched in between additional mud and adobe bricks. This is called UF cable. It stands for underground feeder, and that's meant for burial in the earth, which is what's happening here when we place mud on it. These cables lay out on the course in which you want your plugs to occur, and then they come out into the outlet. One difference with the outlet in an adobe wall is there isn't a wooden stud to nail it into. So what I've done here is taken a 3/4 inch by 3 to 4 inch width of scrap wood and screwed the electrical box directly into the piece of wood. And we've used what are called strain reliefs on the back. The wire will not pull out. And we just leave it in this state until the electrician comes in and wires it up later on. This then gets adobes laid up on top of it, again with mud mortar, and it actually forms a sandwich and really locks this into place so it can't move. Sometimes it's necessary to attach another wall, such as a frame wall, to the adobe wall, and there are a couple of different ways of doing this. You can use a Gringo block or what are called stab bolts. A Gringo block is made out of 2x4s, and it's just a hollow block that is inserted in place of an adobe and then filled with mud. This then gives something to nail into, unlike the adobe block, which does not have any structural strength for taking in nails or bolts. Now this is a bolt that we've embedded in between 2 courses of adobe, but we've used regular cement mortar. The stab bolt actually has a slight S pattern to it, so when this is set into mortar, this isn't going to go anywhere and it's going to be rock solid for our structure. Adobe is just such a great and fun material to work with. Every day your wall goes up in a completed form at every step. Unlike a frame wall where you need to add sheetrock and taping and plaster and things, an adobe wall is finished at each step, so it's really a beautiful material to watch go up.
Thermal mass walls cost more initially than conventional wood frame walls. This expense is offset, however, by the fact that all air conditioning costs will be eliminated, including ductwork and installation at the time of construction, and maintenance and electrical costs over the life of the building. Looking at the entire package allows a better assessment of long-term value.
What you're going to see here are 3 different types of forming up the bond beam forms. So what Tom is doing here is he's cutting adobe blocks with a power saw with a masonry blade on it, and we're using these as the form itself for the bond beam. The first system we're using here is for the 2-foot thick solar mass wall, and since it is 2 feet thick, code in New Mexico says that the bond beam only has to cover 2/3 of the width. That gives us a little bit of playroom to use a different material for actually forming up the form for the bond beam. So I'm just putting these into place with mud mortar. They're cut to the right height, so we're at least 6 inches thick. And we're forming a trough that we'll then be able to pour concrete into at a later point. Now on narrower walls, like this standard 10-inch thick adobe wall, we're going to use a more conventional approach to forming up a bond beam, and that is with lumber. So here we're using some scrap lumber, and L is affixing this kind of pre-assembled piece into position that uses just kind of a friction fit to keep it from falling off. There are wire ties on the bottom that crisscross, and that makes for a rest for the forms to sit on. Again, the accuracy here is very important. You want to make sure everything is straight and level. You want to make sure that the pour will be at least 6 inches thick. And once everything is in place, you can go back and start adding your number 4 rebar. And notice that as it comes out of the 10-inch wall into the 2-foot thick wall, it actually crosses over to the far side. This is a technique that makes for a very strong wall. The 2-foot thick section of bond beam has 3 parallel rows of number 4 rebar. And it's sitting on little steel chairs, so this gets the metal kind of suspended within the concrete itself for additional strength. Since this is a small house, using buckets to carry the concrete up to the top of the wall was no big deal. By inserting anchor bolts into this bond beam, roof trusses can then be bolted onto the adobe wall itself. Something else we have here is bond beam block. And it kind of looks like a cement block, except it has these slots cut in it. With these slots, we can actually knock out the side. Now this little 3-inch piece here then becomes the support for our rebar, which is really handy. And we then take the block, mortar it in place, level it up with our speed lead. We lay our rebar in it, and then this whole cavity gets poured with concrete.
The thermal mass walls are finished. The project will now move on to wood frame construction.